In 1995, Roy Rogers sent a letter that was going to destroy his building. Before 2009, no one knew what was inside. There were strict rules in the letter about money and family debt. He started to cry when his son Dusty opened it. The museum was making a lot of money, but something wasn't right. Roy had said that this would happen 14 years ago. He knew that his memory would be a pain. Because of the message, his family had to make a decision that they couldn't keep. Fans asked them not to do it. Roy's last words were clear, though. You'll be shocked by what he wrote. Roy Rogers' trip began in a quiet area of Ohio. The days were long and the ground was thin. Leonard Sly was born in 1911 and grew up on a small farm near Lucasville with his family. There wasn't enough money. Things got worse during the Great Depression, and his dad had to get a job at a shoe factory in Portsmouth. He could only come home on the weekends. Roy felt like they couldn't afford to go to school by the time he was 13. To keep the family going, he went back to that plant and worked as hard as he could. Things in their lives kept getting in the way, and by 1930, he felt like staying no longer made sense. He hitched a ride to California with only $17 in his pocket. He would often end the night in his car. He did any job he could find during the day, like picking apples for Del Monte. It was a rough time. A lot of people were coming to California to find work, and he was right there with them, trying to hold on to hope. Those early years shaped him. They made something tough. That helped him become an image of the American cowboy. Things soon started to change. He worked with Tim Spencer and Bob Nolan in 1933. At first, they were called the Pioneer Trio. But as more artists joined, the name was changed to the Sons of the Pioneers. It was on the Los Angeles radio station KFWB that they first got noticed for their smooth Western duets and yodeling. They signed with Decca Records in 1935. Slowly, songs like Cool Water and Tumbling Tumbleweeds spread across the country. People who had never been to the Wild West started to hear it and picture it. In the 1930s and 1940s, the group sold more than 10 million records, played on big radio shows, and brought Western music into every home. During this time, Roy went by the name Dick Weston and was the lead singer and bass guitarist for the group. His rise to fame with Sons of the Pioneers paved the way for him to go straight to Hollywood. In 1937, he did something that would change everything. He went against the rules to get a screen test at Republic Pictures. Some people in the studio looked at him and said in secret that he was too country or even too simple for movies. But what the makers saw was different. He was hired for $75 a week, which is about $1,240 today, because of that spark. He became famous so quickly after that by 1940, he was already known as the King of Cowboys. He played in under Western stars the next year. Over 2.5 million people listened to him every week on the radio. People believed in him because he seemed honest. He didn't mean to kill anyone. As a safer hero for families to follow, he aimed at the bad guys' guns and knocked them out of their hands. By the middle of the 1940s, he was one of Hollywood's best-paid stars, but he kept the gentle Western look that made him stand out. He was happiest when he married Dale Evans in 1943, but they also had a lot of hard times together. They had 9 kids together, but not all of them were their own. They made a big, loving home. Then bad things happened in 1946. Robin, their daughter, was born with Down syndrome and a heart problem. She died 2 days before her second birthday from complications from mumps. They were broken by the loss. It almost kept them out of the spotlight for good. But after being sad for months, their faith gave them strength and changed the way they worked. They made westerns that were hopeful and taught Christian ideals. That earnestness was felt by the audience. People saw them as examples of strength, family, and gentleness. They kept adding to their family by adopting several kids who later played roles with them on TV. Roy Rogers was everywhere by 1950. It all started in December 1951 with The Roy Rogers Show on NBC. 30 million people watched every week almost right away. At the time, it was one of the most loved shows ever. Three-star of the show was Trigger, Roy's golden Palomino horse. Trigger had over 100 tricks he could do. For almost 30 seconds, he could stand on his back legs and rear up. Kids looked forward to those times. Families watched together because the show taught morals and had exciting parts. People saw Trigger as almost human and used him to help teach those lessons. Roy Rogers became a societal icon that people of all ages could relate to after the show ran for 6 seasons on NBC and then again on CBS. After Trigger died, his story went in a strange direction. He was born on July 4, 1934. Roy paid $2,500 for him in 1938. With more than 10,000 fans in his club by 1945, Trigger got more fan mail than Roy himself. Trigger died at Roy's Apple Valley Ranch on July 3, 1965, one day before his 31st birthday. He had a heart attack. Roy was very sad. He didn't tell Dale Evans for almost a year because he couldn't bring himself to. Instead, he hired Everett Curly Everts, a taxidermist from Bischoff's Taxidermy in Burbank, in secret. Everts put Trigger's hide over a foam body and gave it glass eyes. It took 6 months and cost $3,000, which is about $30,000 today. When it was done, the mound was 15 hands tall and weighed 1,060 pounds. He stayed at the ranch at first. Later, it was moved to the Roy Rogers Museum in Victorville, where fans took pictures just inches away without realizing that arsenic had been used to keep the mount in good shape. Trigger was on show at the museum until it closed in 2010. After that, he was sold for $2,600. Bullet, the dog, also had a strange fate. He passed away in 1958. Roy also couldn't bury him. It cost $1,500 for the same taxidermy shop to keep him in an alert pose and dye his fur to match the pictures. About 50,000 people visited the show every year to admire the loyal German Shepherd that they had seen run with Trigger in the movie. It was sold at auction for $35,000 after the museum closed in 2010. And was later put on display next to Trigger at RFD-TV's collection. For decades, the two icons stood still and quietly. The museum itself had stories that made people feel both nostalgic and uneasy. It opened on June 15, 1967, on 67 acres of the Double R Bar Ranch in Apple Valley. Roy built it because he had been to the Will Rogers Museum many years before and hoped it had more personal items. He got as much information as he could from his own life and work. It only cost $1 to get in. More than 100,000 people came in its first year, and many of them heard about it from other people. It turned into a place where families, tourists, and Western fans would go on Route 66. Roy was there a lot of the time. He sometimes led tours himself. Sometimes he played guitar for small groups too. The museum had a lot of personal things, like costumes, props, saddles, and more, that made fans feel like they were in his world. Dale Evans's personal Bible was one of the most moving displays. It had notes from the death of their daughter Robin in 1946 inside. Psalm 23 was found in the Bible. Roy often read out loud from it on tours, talking in a soft way that surprised people who heard it. A lot of people cried when he talked about how those words helped him and Dale get through their sadness. The Bible showed a side of them that the cameras could never capture, a side marked by pain, faith, and quiet strength. A silver nail saddle that Dale Evans hand-stitched in 1944 was another show that amazed people. It had 1,000 silver nails in it. And Trigger's boss was carved into it. In those days, it was worth $10,000, which is more than $100,000 now. Roy used it in the 1952 movie Son of Paleface. A small gun prop used for shooting was hidden inside the saddle. The work was beautiful. It was a gift from Dale to Roy and became one of the museum's most cherished items. A sign of how closely their job and marriage were linked. The Roy Rogers and Dale Evans Museum in Victorville felt like it was lit up from the inside by 1980. Every year, about 250,000 people poured in. When families came, they had cameras ready. When the kids walked through the doors, they held their breath because they didn't know when Roy would come out and show them a lasso trick. Over 1 million soldiers in Europe during World War II laughed along with him on his 1945 USO tour. Sometimes he even brought a volunteer onto the stage to act out parts of that tour. People came from all over the country just to see Trigger, his famous Palomino, standing still in golden light. When it was busy, the museum didn't feel like a stop on Route 66 as much as it did like a path to follow. A spot where fans could go back to the time when he was the king of the Cowboys. The rooms were slowly getting more and more excited as time went on. Kids waited for hours to shake hands. The visit fit into the parents' holiday plans. Roy was still there, so the place shone. As people moved toward Sandy Rogers' exhibit, the glow got a little weaker. His story was more important. Roy and Dale took him in as their own child when they found him in a hospital in Kentucky when he was only 4 years old. He was starving and left alone. They took him home and made his life better in ways he never would have had before. Sandy then died in a terrible bus accident near San Clemente in 1968, when he was only 18 years old. He was coming back from a mission trip to Tijuana. 11 more people died that night, and many of them were children. Sandy's flight jacket and dog tags from Vietnam were on display at the museum, but they were protected by glass. Roy gave it to him after his own USO trip to Vietnam in 1967. People often stayed there longer than they planned to. Some people whispered and some cried. The sudden quiet was felt by everyone. The Rogers family used that small room to remember Sandy. People who stood in front of it felt the weight of a life cut short. Over the years, the museum kept getting bigger. In 2003, it was decided to move everything to Branson. People didn't come to Victorville as much after the 9/11 attacks because they were afraid to travel. The family felt they had no choice but to go. Plus, they packed up more than 12,000 square feet of trade shows. Trigger was put in a trailer with ice to stay safe. Staff put precious items on trucks in the middle of the night to keep them safe. There was a $2 million move. The many tourists in Branson made people think of a fresh start, but the people who lived in Victorville felt left out. The move shook up the museum's story in a way. It was the end of an age and the start of a new one that didn't feel as stable. There was hope in the Grand Branson's opening. A crowd of 5,000 people watched Dusty Rogers sing 10 songs. It felt like the magic had followed them for a moment. But something important was missing from the building. No one had done seismic upgrading before. In 2005, there was an earthquake in Missouri that broke Trigger's glass case. A lot of people couldn't believe it. The museum that was all about history forgot to protect itself from the smallest danger. After the emergency repairs, critics argued openly about the standards for preservation. Fans were scared about what else could be in danger. Still, some things kept their charm, like Nellie Bell, Willie's 1949 Jeep from the Roy Rogers show. A lot of people liked that Jeep. The car went through scenes, fake bullets in a 1952 show, and more than 50,000 miles on screen. It kept rolling. It was fixed up for $15,000, with bullet holes and all. The kids knew what it was right away. Parents remembered it from when they were kids. It stood there like a small machine that held the past of a whole family. Then one day, everything changed. Roy Rogers passed away on July 6, 1998. He was 86 years old. The Victorville Museum started to slow down even before it moved to Branson. It was getting about 200,000 people a year. The number dropped to 120,000 in just 2 years after he died. Later, Dusty Rogers said that people were so upset that they didn't go to the museum. They said it was strange to walk through rooms where Roy used to stand and greet them. Not only did the drop hurt the museum, but it also hurt companies nearby that relied on visitors. The town as a whole felt the loss. Soon, the family got an even bigger surprise. The IRS questioned Roy's estate's value after he died and asked for more than $1.2 million in taxes. According to records, the government thought the family had lied about how much some gifts of real estate were worth by almost $1 million. The estate sold smaller items of souvenirs to pay the lawyers' fees. Even though some of Roy's signed 1946 All-Star Game baseballs sold for about $5,000 each, they didn't do much to help. Then staff was cut. The exhibits were pushed back. Dusty said that the stress made the museum feel like it was suddenly fighting for its life. Dusty worked hard to keep the museum going. At age 53, he pushed for modernization and spent $50,000 on interactive booths that showed scenes from Roy's 100 movies. However, the kiosks were built on VHS machines that broke down almost every week. About 20% of the time, they just froze, which made guests angry and confused. Fans who were older liked the old-fashioned shows better. Younger fans wanted the technology to work better. The museum also had something that cost money to keep up but didn't give much back. After that, in 1999, the museum added an exhibit about Dale Evans. Happy Trails, the song she won an Oscar for, played softly in the background while people read her private letters. In one letter, a loss in 1947 was talked about. Dale hadn't talked about it much. All of a sudden, her happy public image felt complicated, fragile, and terribly human. Some tourists liked how honest it was. Some people turned away. The exhibit made people feel things that wouldn't go away quickly. Over the years, the museum had to pay more and more just to keep its famous animals safe. Every month, it cost $4,000 to keep Trigger and Bullet safe with climate-controlled air conditioning. In 2004, someone tried to take strands from Trigger's mane. On the black market, each strand was worth around $1,000. The museum's insurance rates went up by 3 times. Money that wasn't having much fun was used up by new protection systems. Trigger became a sign of both pride and weight. Giving up almost everything else to save him was hard. In the meantime, Branson was hit hard by the recession of 2008. The number of tourists dropped by 35%. It cost $4 a gallon to buy gas. People who used to drive 200 miles for the weekend didn't go anywhere. People who went to the museum dropped from about 100,000 a year to less than 50,000. Donations went down. Some smaller attractions in town shut down totally. Branson used to feel like a safe move, but now it feels open. It got too expensive to even take care of the taxidermy. Every year, it costs $25,000 to fix for bugs and control humidity. So that it wouldn't crack in the dry air, Trigger's hair had to be bathed in oil 4 times a year. Damage that costs more than $2,000 to fix could happen if you miss even one treatment. Conservatives said that the amount of work was getting too heavy because the budget was getting smaller. In 2008, Dusty tried yet another big plan. He put $100,000 into VR attractions in the hopes that they would bring back younger tourists. About 10% of users actually used them. A few people felt sick. Some people said they had headaches. The $10 ticket price only paid about 60% of the $300,000 it cost to run the museum. The upgrades didn't feel like they were really helping. Then there were quick staff cuts. 8 people were hired instead of 15. People touched items because there weren't enough guides. They got into limited areas and sometimes did damage. Someone brushed Buttermilk's tail by mistake, leaving a mark in the dust that cost $2,000 to fix. Too many people were in the museum. It began to lose its good name. About $1 million a year used to come in from royalties from the Roy Rogers Restaurant Company. In 2008, those payments were cut in half as the chain got shorter. There were a lot of bills. Dusty had no choice but to lend the museum $150,000 from one of his music shows just to keep the lights on. The doors stayed open for a little while longer, but it was already clear what was going on. The building was going down. Roy Rogers wrote that letter in 1995 because he knew that time was running out and he didn't want any misunderstandings to happen. He told Dusty that everything had to go if costs ever went up 20% more than income. His riches, the museum, and the displays he put together over many years. Everything was going to be sold so that his grandchildren would never have to pay off debts in his name. At first, it seemed strict, but as you read it more carefully, you could feel the fear of a father who doesn't want to put too much on his family. He thought about them more than himself. For them to be free, he was willing to give up the place that was built around his name. And that harsh truth got closer over the years after Roy's death. By 2009, the count showed loss after loss, and the family could no longer run away from the truth. That letter helped them find their way. It was like Roy spoke to them and told them what was most important. It wasn't the boots, horses, or museum walls that made it important, it was the family that was there. Everything changed again when Dale Evans died in 2001. Because she wasn't there, Dusty had to make choices by herself that were too big for one person to handle. The family got together in 2009 to talk about the future of the museum. The room was quiet and full of memories. In 1946, they lost their baby girl Robin. Dusty cried as he talked about her. That loss brought the whole family together a long time ago. Hearing that the museum might close felt different from the first goodbye. Once upon a time, Dale was the steady voice that kept the family together. The meeting felt raw without her there. Every story about the museum brought up an old memory that made them cry. It was clear from Dusty's tears that this wasn't just business. After more than 60 years, it was the end of something important to them. Later that same year, the brothers got together again, this time with the ledgers out on the table. The numbers were lined up like alerts. A loss of $200,000. Air is tense. Adding up worry and silence. Dusty's wife spoke up and reminded everyone that the museum's bills were making it harder for families to save for college. Roy was no longer the only thing that was important. Now it was time to protect the next generation. Each choice was talked over, but all of them led to the same wall. The building was going down. And Dusty couldn't stop thinking about what his dad wrote in that letter in 1995. Roy had set the limit years ago, so the family made the choice even though they didn't want to. There was then an offer from the Smithsonian of $500,000. This was a loan big enough to keep the doors open for a little longer. In the 1940s, Roy had lived through union fights and made himself a rule. The government won't help him or anything that has his name on it. Fans begged for the museum to stay open, but the family felt that rule pressing down on them. There was a protest. That more than 10,000 people have signed. They were begged to make the deal. They still said no because Roy had already said no. At the same time, it felt brave and painful. Many fans would not understand, but they did it to protect the legacy by giving up what the heritage had built. By November 2009, everyone had agreed. Shut down the museum. December 12th was chosen as the last day. At 5 p.m., Dusty locked the doors and left a note that said, "Happy trails as Dad would have it." On the last day, 200 people came through, and many of them had tears in their eyes. Some said thank you in whispers. Some people touched Trigger's screen one last time. It seemed like Roy was standing there with them and gently nodding from the note on the door. The end of an age was quiet. As the lights went out, the bidding then came. July 14, 2010. New York's Christie's. When the light hit Trigger, the room stopped moving. Everyone was shocked when the winning bid was $266,500. As of before the sale, the projections were much lower. Trigger had been kept alive since 1965, standing tall in the same pose he used to do in the movies. Patrick Gotch of RFD-TV made the last bid. The hammer fell for people in 47 different countries. Soon after, Trigger was taken to Nashville in a custom-made box, where plans were made for a new place to show him. That auction set new records and lit up the world of collectibles. Still, the sale had a lot of surprises. Roy's 1940s flight jacket went up in value to $7,500. Just because troops had signed it while he was in Vietnam. An old picture BB gun set from the 1950s sold for $37.50, which was a lot more than anyone thought it would get. People who liked these pieces called them hidden gems. Even experts at Christie's said they didn't realize how much people cared about the smaller things. The most moving moment was when Dale Evans' dress from the 1947 movie Driftwood sold for $15,000. A lot of people in the room liked that sale better than some of the stronger bids. Robin's baby blanket, which was linked to the family's worst grief, sold for only $1,200, which seems like a small amount for such a painful memory. The day felt like something no one would ever forget because it was both sad and exciting. The sale had 700 lots and lasted 2 days. It raised $2,980,000. Trigger got all the attention in the world, but Roy's special saddle brought in $386,500. Dale's parade saddle made $104,500. The TV show's Jeep, Nellie Bell, even got a new owner for $98,500. There were fans from all over the world who watched as pieces of their childhood went to different people. The sale did more than just make money, though. It shook up history. The animals that Trigger rode with also got new homes. It cost $35,000 to sell Bullet. It cost $25,000 to buy Buttermilk. A buyer from Missouri bought Nellie Bell and wanted the original stickers to stay on. A lot of fans were shocked when they split up. Later, RFD-TV got Trigger, Bullet, and Buttermilk back together at their offices to try to keep some of the old spirit. But not everyone was okay with the museum splitting up. People were very upset when they heard in June 2010 that Trigger would be auctioned off. They wrote thousands of posts on sites calling it disrespectful. Some people said Trigger should be in a museum like the Smithsonian. Protests got bigger until 15,000 people signed a Change.org petition. Around 200 people were protesting outside of Christie's Beverly Hills preview and yelling "Save Trigger." Christie's went ahead with their plans anyway. The argument spread to the media, and some people asked if history should ever be sold to private individuals. Dusty stepped in to protect the family. He said that after the museum closed, there was no way to keep the collection together. People thought Roy's family was taking advantage of him even when his first guitar sold for $8,750. The money helped build trust in the family, but the reaction hurt. It showed how strong love can be when you try to value it. More people didn't like Trigger's taxidermy when they found out that the artist had used hair from Trigger's real tail. When animal rights groups spoke out, they were heard. It was thought to be depressing. Fans were also nervous, even though Roy had permits from 1965. The tense pose made things worse, and people started talking about how we can protect animals we love. Things did not settle down easily afterward. When RFD-TV bought Trigger, they took him on tour and paid $10,000 for each show. In 2012, a fan sued them, saying that they were taking advantage of a culture icon. A lot of people called for a boycott before the case was quietly settled. It showed that the story still made people feel things even after the museum closed. Today, Trigger is at rest in the Nashville studio of RFD-TV. A lot of people, about 10,000 a year, pay $20 to see him. The real Trigger is not in Apple Valley, but there is a plastic copy of it there. This is where his story began. Bullet is hidden in a private collection in Ohio. Buttermilk is still sold at events in California, but experts are worried that the humidity will hurt it in the long run. Now, these pieces of history are spread out, living their own lives away from the others. Dusty is 78 years old now, and still puts on tribute shows. He makes about $50,000 a year by telling stories about the museum and his family's past. In an interview in 2020, he said that stopping the museum got rid of their $400,000 debt. He still tells the old stories on stage, but they don't seem as heavy now. Too much had been spent to keep the family together. Even so, Roy's effect is still felt today. Shows like Yellowstone make me think of his wild spirit. A total of 4 of his guitars sold for $46,000. They are now in collections. On her 2018 country record, Taylor Swift said that her style was influenced by his. The museum is no longer there, but the story lives on in new hands and on new screens.